Identity foreclosure. The pre-programmed life. You're not failing because you lack talent or effort. You're failing because you've locked yourself into an identity that was never yours to begin with. And every decision you make is designed to protect that false version of yourself rather than build the real one. You think you're living your life, but you're actually living someone else's script. You committed to a role without ever testing it against reality. The problem is, you won't realize you're in the wrong life until the plan stops working and you have no backup version of yourself. Identity foreclosure happens when you accept a ready-made identity from authority figures without exploration. Psychologist James Marsha identified this in 1966. High commitment, zero exploration. You didn't choose your path. You inherited it. It's the difference between a destination you programmed and one that came preloaded. Authority figures hand you a ready-made self. You adopt it because it avoids the anxiety of figuring out who you actually are. You're the farmer's son who takes over the estate not because you love agriculture, but because heir to the farm was your identity since childhood. You're the athlete who builds everything around sports, then faces a career-ending injury with no backup version of yourself to inhabit. The surface advantage is stability. You skip the identity crisis while your peers struggle with uncertainty. But the cost is brutal. Zero autonomy, zero flexibility, and high risk of midlife burnout when the external structures supporting your borrowed identity finally fail. The way out starts with exploration. Test your identity against reality. Ask yourself, if this role disappeared tomorrow, who would I be? Start building alternative versions of yourself before the external structures supporting your borrowed identity fail. The ego mind trap. Defending who you are instead of becoming who you need to be. You're spending all your energy protecting your current self-image, and that's exactly why you can't grow. Every ounce of effort you invest in appearing competent is effort you can't spend actually becoming more capable. The version of you that got you here won't get you where you need to go next. The ego mind trap is an evolutionary mechanism that compels you to defend your current self-image at the expense of growth. Leadership expert Jennifer Garvey Berger identified this as being trapped by your own ego, constantly managing the impressions others have of you while shielding that persona from any perceived harm. You need to understand the distinction. Horizontal development is adding more skills and knowledge. Vertical development is expanding your actual way of thinking. The ego mind trap keeps you locked in horizontal mode because vertical growth requires admitting your current perspective might be wrong, and your ego can't tolerate that. You see this when you refuse to adopt new tools or methods, because doing so would require admitting your old approach, central to your identity as an expert, is outdated. You prioritize appearing competent over actually being effective. You engage in motivated reasoning to protect valued identities like truth teller or moral leader, even when your actions deviate from those standards. The trap evolved to protect your social status and avoid exclusion. In simple environments, that worked. In complex systems, it narrows your perspective, weakens your ability to handle ambiguity, and creates blindness to data that proves you wrong. Here's what needs to change. Shift your focus from protecting who I am to asking, who do I want to be next? This requires self-awareness and willingness to experience the discomfort of growth. Stop defending your current self and start building your future one. The perfectionist trap. The pursuit of impossible standards. You've convinced yourself that perfection is the standard and anything less is failure. That binary thinking is destroying your productivity, your relationships, and your mental health. You've tethered your entire sense of worth to achieving flawlessness, and that standard guarantees you'll never feel valuable. The perfectionist trap is a pattern where you believe you must do everything perfectly to be considered valuable. This trap is driven by a deep fear of failure, rejection, or disappointing others, leading you to chronic overfunctioning. You create a perfectionist then collapse cycle that fuels your exhaustion, inflammation, and guilt. You engage in all or nothing thinking. Anything less than 100% success feels like total failure to you. You pursue excessively high standards, catastrophize minor errors, and compulsively refine your work past the point of diminishing returns. You dismiss compliments because if you haven't reached your internal ideal, any external praise feels unearned. You procrastinate excessively because your fear of not producing something perfect prevents you from starting at all. You spend hours on a single email, micromanaging every semicolon while your broader project deadline looms. You set unachievable goals, then abandon your entire plan because you failed by making one small mistake. As a leader, you struggle to delegate because you believe no one else can do it right, which leaves you overworked and resentful. This trap often links to childhood environments where love was conditional upon your performance, creating an inner critic that is never satisfied. What you need is recalibration of what matters. Adopt self-compassion and recognize that good enough is often the most effective path toward actual progress. Progress beats perfection every time. The imposter syndrome. Success you can't internalize. You're achieving real results, but your brain refuses to let you own them. You attribute every win to luck, timing, or other people, and you're trapped in a cycle where success only increases your fear of being exposed. You're one mistake away from believing everything you've built is a house of cards. The imposter syndrome is an internal experience where you feel like a fraud despite clear evidence of your competence. First described by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978, this trap involves your chronic inability to internalize success. You attribute your accomplishments to external factors like luck, timing, or social skills rather than your own abilities. You're caught in the imposter cycle. Success leads to brief relief, followed by increased anxiety and the belief that next time you'll finally be exposed. You feel you need to be the very best. You overwork to compensate for what you perceive as lack of talent. You deny your competence and discount praise. You win a prestigious award and immediately think the judges must have had a weak pool of candidates rather than accepting your work was superior. You avoid applying for promotions or speaking up in meetings, fulfilling your internal prophecy of being less capable than your peers. Maya Angelou, despite winning 3 Grammys and being nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, once said, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody." What breaks this cycle is rewriting your internal narrative. When you succeed, you must actively attribute it to your competence, not external factors. True humility doesn't mean undermining your legitimate successes. You can't wait for the fear to disappear. You have to act despite it and let the evidence accumulate. The victim identity, trading power for sympathy. You're identifying as a victim of your circumstances, and every moment you spend in that identity is a moment you're giving away your ability to change those circumstances. You think you're acknowledging reality. Actually, you're building a prison where you're both the inmate and the guard. The victim identity provides temporary sympathy but permanent powerlessness. The victim identity is a mindset where you identify primarily as a target of other people's actions or external circumstances, often as a defense mechanism to manage trauma or avoid responsibility. You create a fixed moral dichotomy where you see yourself as inherently good, passive, and vulnerable, while you see others as aggressive, threatening, and immoral. You engage in rumination, focusing excessively on your distress and its causes rather than solutions. You hold exclusive victim beliefs, convincing yourself that your suffering is unique and more severe than anyone else's. You feel entitled to special treatment because you've suffered, believing you're exempt from standard social norms. You stay trapped in past broken relationships, withholding trust and lashing out at new partners as dysfunctional self-protection. You blame corporate politics or unfair management for your lack of promotion, ignoring feedback that could help you improve. You deny your own agency, leading to learned helplessness, where you perceive a lack of control over your life's outcomes. The shift required is from victim to victor. You must focus on meaning-making and post-traumatic growth, using your past trauma as a catalyst to develop greater psychological strength. You need to move your locus of control from external to internal, from things happen to me to I influence outcomes. You can't control what happened to you, but you control what you do next. The people-pleasing trap. Erasing yourself to keep others comfortable. You're saying yes when you mean no. You're apologizing when you've done nothing wrong. You're reshaping yourself to fit what you think others want, and in the process, you're losing any sense of who you actually are. You're systematically prioritizing everyone else's emotional needs over your own, and the cost is your authenticity. The people-pleasing trap is a survival strategy where you alter your inner world to soothe external situations, managing your anxiety about others' potential disapproval or rejection. You lack differentiation of self, the inability to maintain a clear sense of identity while staying connected to a social group. You can't assert yourself. You chronically over-apologize for things that aren't your fault. You have a compulsive need to be well-liked. You function as a social chameleon, sacrificing your own values and principles to fit in or appease dominant figures. You experience emotional bankruptcy because you're constantly living off an emotional credit line, relying on others for regulation and boundary setting because you lack the internal mechanisms to do it yourself. You become the fixer who takes on everyone else's work to avoid conflict, eventually leading to emotional burnout and deep resentment. You suppress your own career or relationship choices to align with your parents' expectations, effectively living a life that isn't yours. You always follow the rules, but feel tense, anxious, or on edge because you're suppressing your authentic desires. This identity often originates in early childhood, where love was conditional, or parents were emotionally unavailable, forcing you to earn affection through compliance. What you need to do is practice small, clear refusals. Set boundaries and develop a solid sense of self that can withstand the discomfort of being disliked. Stop living for everyone else's approval. The comparison trap. Measuring your worth against everyone else's highlight reel. You're scrolling through social media right now, looking at someone's vacation photos, their promotion announcement, their perfect relationship, and you're feeling like your life doesn't measure up. You think you're just observing. Actually, you're using other people's highlight reels as the measuring stick for your own worth, and that measurement system guarantees you'll always feel inadequate. You're evaluating your behind-the-scenes reality against everyone else's carefully curated performance. The comparison trap is rooted in Leon Festinger's 1954 social comparison theory. This behavior is a deeply ingrained human instinct used to evaluate progress and set goals. But when taken to an extreme, it becomes a downward spiral known as compare and despair. You know you're in this trap when you can't celebrate others' success without feeling diminished. You feel stuck before starting a new goal because someone else is already ahead. You measure your worth by others' achievements. You feel like your decade of hard work is never enough because a peer just bought a more expensive car or achieved a faster promotion, and suddenly your progress feels meaningless. Teenagers judge their reality against the idealized, inauthentic lives of influencers on Instagram, fueling anxiety and body image issues. The algorithms feed you content designed to make you feel inadequate, and you internalize that inadequacy as truth. What you need is a personal definition of success based on your own values, not external benchmarks. Shift from external comparison to internal comparison, measuring yourself only against your own past self. Practice gratitude for what you have and limit social media exposure to reconnect with your internal compass. Your worth isn't determined by how you stack up against others. The simple stories. Mindtrap. When easy narratives erase real complexity. You're looking at a complex problem and reducing it to a simple story with a hero, a villain, and a clear cause. You think that simplicity brings clarity. Actually, it's blinding you to the real systems at play, and those blind spots are leading you to catastrophically wrong decisions. The simpler your story, the more likely you are to miss the truth. The simple story's mind trap is a cognitive shortcut where your brain, wired for narrative, fills in the gaps of an uncertain world with default templates of heroes and villains. You rely on these simple stories because they provide emotional comfort and predictability, but they lead to an impoverished set of choices in complex situations. You know you're in this trap when you rely on heroic tales of your past successes to justify current actions, even when those actions are failing. You ignore resource gaps and constraints because they don't fit the optimistic narrative you've constructed. You attribute business failures to simple external causes like bad timing or strong competition, while ignoring the complex internal factors like poor culture or strategic misalignment. A founder delays a product launch for one more feature, telling a simple story that this feature is the key to success, when the real story is fear of market rejection. The simple narrative protects the ego but sabotages the outcome. The fix is generating 3 alternative explanations for any simple story you're telling yourself. Use pre-mortem planning to uncover the risks you're ignoring. Stop looking for the single cause and start examining the interconnected systems at play. Complexity is uncomfortable, but it's where the truth lives. The trap of rightness, mistaking certainty for truth. You're absolutely certain you're right, and that certainty feels like proof. But here's the problem. Your brain has confused the emotion of certainty with a reasoned conclusion, and that false confidence is making you dismiss information that could save you from massive failure. The more certain you feel, the more blind you are to being wrong. The trap of rightness is a cognitive barrier where you mistake the sparkling clarity of believing your perspective is absolute truth for actual understanding. You believe what you see and don't notice what you don't see, maintaining a constant false sense of being right about most things. You know you're in this trap when you've lost curiosity and stopped listening well to others. You collect data that reinforces your rightness while ignoring data that proves you wrong. You feel annoyed or offended when your views are questioned. Your defensiveness impacts how you treat people, particularly those with dissenting opinions. An executive ignores market research because it contradicts their gut feeling about a new project, leading to a massive financial loss. They were certain they understood the market, and that certainty prevented them from seeing the actual data showing they were wrong. The trap evolved as an energy-saving shortcut for a simple world where quick, certain decisions were necessary for survival. In complex systems, that same certainty makes you dangerous because you're blind to real-world complexity. The solution is shifting from listening to win to listening to learn. Regularly ask yourself, what do I believe and how could I be wrong? Treat certainty as a warning sign, not a green light. Your confidence might just be your blind spot talking. The control trap, losing influence by trying to control everything. You're micromanaging every detail, demanding more data before every decision, and refusing to delegate because you believe no one else can do it right. You think you're being thorough. Actually, your obsession with control is stripping away your real influence and making outcomes worse. The tighter you grip, the less power you actually have. The control trap is an identity trap where you attempt to manage uncertainty by seizing direct charge of outcomes, which paradoxically strips you of actual influence. Rooted in the biological need for control to maintain happiness and longevity, this trap compels you to grab charge of big, complex issues that are fundamentally unpredictable. You know you're in this trap when you micromanage, believe no one else can do it right, and compensate for lack of control over big things by obsessively controlling small things. You ruminate without resolving dilemmas, hyper-focused on causes rather than enabling conditions. You exhibit high-pressure goal-seeking, which triggers physical and relational stress. A health-conscious person overextends during holidays to ensure everything is perfect, only to end up with fatigue and emotional burnout. An executive demands 3 more data points before making a decision while the market shifts beneath them, effectively losing control of the outcome by trying to control the data. A coach uses a controlling style, which research shows makes athletes more fearful of failure and less able to achieve peak potential. What needs to shift is your focus from outcomes to influence. Stop trying to command results and start creating conditions for good things to happen. Ask yourself, what can I help enable? Not, what can I force to happen? Let go of direct control and you'll gain actual influence.